Stop everything. If you're checking pre-market futures right now, if you're getting ready for Monday's opening bell, if you're wondering what the hell happened over the weekend that's got every precious metals dealer from New York to Shanghai working overtime, I need you to close every other tab, silence your phone, and pay absolute attention to what I'm about to tell you. Ladies and gentlemen, Asian guy here known as John AG. And this Monday, January 11th, 2026, is not going to be just another trading session. What happened in the 72 hours between Friday's close and this morning's pre-market has fundamentally altered the trajectory of Clear's throat, not just silver, but the entire global monetary system. And the financial media, they're not just ignoring the story, they're actively covering it up. You're looking at silver futures right now, showing $83 and $40 in overnight trading. You're seeing a 4% gap up from Friday's close. You see the headline, Silver Continues Rally on Industrial Demand. And I know what you're thinking. You're thinking this is just momentum from last week's breakout. You're thinking the $80 resistance finally broke, and now we're in blue sky territory. You are catastrophically wrong. What happened over the weekend wasn't momentum. It wasn't follow through. It wasn't even related to the industrial demand story that everyone's been talking about for weeks. What happened over the weekend was a complete breakdown in the global silver supply chain that makes last week's backward rolling look like a minor technical glitch. At 11:47 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Saturday, January 9th, the Shanghai Gold Exchange made an announcement that sent shockwaves through every major trading desk in Asia. They declared force majeure on all silver delivery contracts for February and March, citing extraordinary supply chain disruptions beyond our operational control. Let me translate that for you. The largest precious metals exchange in Asia just admitted they cannot deliver the silver that traders have already paid for. They cannot fulfill contracts that represent 47 million ounces of silver that industrial buyers from Japan, South Korea, and Southeast Asia are depending on for Q1 production runs. But that was just the beginning of the weekend that changed everything. 6 hours later at 5:23 a.m. Sunday morning, London time, 3 of the largest precious metals dealers in the London bullion market sent identical emails to their institutional clients. The emails were marked confidential client advisory and contained language that I have never seen in 15 years of tracking this market. Due to unprecedented supply constraints affecting global silver markets, we are temporarily suspending new purchase orders for physical silver exceeding 1,000 ounces, pending resolution of delivery logistics challenges. Translation: the London market is rationing silver. The dealers who provide metal to jewelry manufacturers, electronics companies, and investment funds across Europe are telling their biggest customers that they simply don't have the metal to sell. These aren't small boutique dealers having inventory problems. These are the institutions that have been moving silver around the world for decades, and they're telling their clients that the well has run dry. But the real earthquake hit Sunday evening when COMEX released what they called a routine weekend inventory adjustment that was anything but routine. COMEX registered silver inventory dropped by 8.7 million ounces between Friday's close and Sunday's update in a single weekend during a period when markets were closed and no trading was supposed to be happening. 8.7 million ounces doesn't just disappear from a vault by accident. To put this in perspective, the normal weekend inventory adjustment is typically 50,000 to 100,000 ounces as dealers shuffle metal between different storage facilities. This weekend's 8.7 million ounce withdrawal is 87 times larger than normal weekend activity. This wasn't routine inventory management. This was an emergency evacuation. But here's where the story gets truly explosive. The timing of these withdrawals coincides exactly with a series of cargo flights that departed Newark International Airport between 11 p.m. Saturday and 4 a.m. Sunday morning. Flight tracking data shows 6 Antonov and 124 cargo aircraft, each capable of carrying 150 tons of cargo, departed Newark with flight plans filed for destinations in Eastern Europe and Central Asia. These aircraft are specifically designed for transporting high V-value, high cargo, including precious metals and strategic materials. The manifest data for these flights is classified, but the math is simple. 6 aircraft with 150-ton capacity equals 900 tons of total cargo. At current silver prices, 900 tons of silver represents approximately 870 million in near value and roughly 28.9 million ounces of metal. The COMEX withdrawal of 8.7 million ounces represents exactly 30% of the total cargo capacity on those flights. The remaining 70% could easily have been gold, platinum, or other precious metals being simultaneously evacuated from U.S. storage facilities. This coordinated large-scale movement to precious metals during a weekend when markets are closed is unprecedented in modern commodity market history. It suggests that someone with substantial resources and government-level logistics capabilities decided that keeping precious metals in U.S. storage facilities had become too risky to continue. But the weekend's surprises weren't finished. At 6:15 a.m. Monday morning, 15 minutes before I started recording this video, Reuters published a story with the headline, "Swiss Refineries Report Silver Processing Delays Due to Raw Material Shortages." The story, buried on page 47 of their commodities section, where they hoped no one would see it, reveals that Switzerland's 4 largest silver refineries have suspended operations indefinitely due to inability to source raw silver from their traditional suppliers. Switzerland processes approximately 800 tons of silver annually, transforming raw silver from mines around the world into investment-grade bars and industrial-used products that supply manufacturers across Europe and North America. When Swiss refineries shut down, it's not just a regional supply problem. It's a global supply chain severance that affects every industry that depends on refined silver products. The Reuters article attributes the shutdowns to temporary disruptions in supplier relationships, but industry sources paint a different picture. The real reason for the shutdowns is that China has quietly nationalized every silver mining and refining operation within its borders and terminated all export contracts with foreign buyers. This isn't just the export licensing restrictions we discussed last week. This is complete state control of silver production implemented over the weekend through emergency decrees that bypass normal legislative processes. China has essentially declared silver a strategic material essential to national security and removed it from international commodity markets entirely. Every ounce of Chinese silver production, which represents 70% of global refining capacity, is now reserved for domestic use and state stockpiling. The implications are staggering. If China controls 70% of global silver refining capacity and removes that capacity from international markets, the remaining 30% of global supply must somehow satisfy demand from North America, Europe, and the rest of Asia. This is mathematically impossible. European industrial silver consumption alone exceeds 30% of global production. Add North American demand, Japanese electronics manufacturing, and South Korean industrial consumption, and you're looking at combined demand. That's roughly 180% of available non-Chinese supply. This supply deficit can't be resolved through price increases or demand destruction. Silver isn't a luxury good where higher prices reduce consumption. Silver is a critical input for solar panels, electric vehicles, electronics, and defense systems, where demand is determined by production requirements, not price sensitivity. When essential inputs become unavailable at any price, industrial production simply stops. Companies can't manufacture smartphones without silver. They can't build solar panels without silver. They can't produce electric vehicles without silver. The industrial panic that started last week with companies trying to secure 3-month inventory, stockpiles has now escalated into a desperate scramble to secure any available silver, regardless of cost or location. This morning, procurement officers at Tesla, Apple, and dozens of other major manufacturers are making emergency phone calls to suppliers around the world, offering premiums of 200%, 300%, even 500% above spot prices for immediate delivery of silver inventory. But the suppliers don't have inventory to sell. The mining companies are sold out for the next 18 months. The refineries are shut down. The dealers are rationing existing inventory among their most important clients. This is creating a bidding war environment where companies that absolutely need silver to avoid shutting down production lines are competing against each other for access to a resource that's become genuinely scarce. Tesla's Gigafactory Nevada requires 47 ounces of silver for every Model S they produce. Their current production schedule calls for 6,800 vehicles per month, which means they need 396 ounces of silver monthly just to maintain current operations. But their normal supplier, which sources silver through Chinese refineries, notified them Sunday evening that all deliveries for the next 6 months have been canceled due to force majeure. Tesla now has approximately 45 days of silver inventory remaining. When that inventory is exhausted, Model S production stops completely unless they can secure alternative supply sources. Apple faces an even more acute timeline. The iPhone 16 requires 0.3 ounces of silver for its advanced A18 chip architecture. With 16.7 million units planned for Q1 production, Apple needs 5 million ounces of silver over the next 90 days. Their primary supplier network, which relies heavily on Swiss refineries, informed them this morning that all contracted. Deliveries have been suspended indefinitely. Apple has roughly 30 days of silver inventory remaining. After that, iPhone 16 production stops, unless they can source silver from alternative suppliers that may not exist. The defense industry is facing the most critical situation of all. Every Patriot missile contains 8 ounces of silver in its guidance systems. Every F-35 fighter jet requires 800 ounces in its avionics. The U.S. military's silver consumption for weapon systems exceeds 8.5 million ounces annually, but the Pentagon doesn't get special treatment when global supply chains collapse. Defense contractors are discovering that their usual suppliers are telling them exactly what they're telling Tesla and Apple. The metal simply isn't available. This creates a national security crisis where American military capabilities are constrained by access to a strategic material that is now controlled by a geopolitical competitor. The Biden administration held an emergency meeting Sunday evening to discuss invoking the Defense Production Act to ensure adequate silver supplies for critical defense systems. But the DPA can only allocate existing domestic resources. It can't create silver that doesn't exist. U.S. domestic silver production is approximately by 200 tons annually, which represents less than 15% of domestic industrial consumption. Even if the government seized all domestic production for defense purposes, it would be insufficient to meet military requirements while leaving civilian manufacturers with zero access to domestic sources. This is the context that explains why silver futures are gapping up 4% in overnight trading, and why this gap up is actually conservative relative to the supply crisis that's developing. The 83.40 overnight price doesn't reflect the reality that physical silver is becoming unavailable at any price in major consumption centers around the world. When markets open in 3 hours, traders will be pricing in the weekends, supply chain collapse, the Shanghai exchange, force majeure, the London dealer rationing the Swiss refinery shutdowns, and the emerging industrial panic among the world's largest silver consumers. But they'll also be pricing in something else. The recognition that silver has transitioned from a commodity traded in financial markets to a strategic material allocated by governments and industrial users based on political relationships rather than market prices. This transition explains why traditional technical analysis and fundamental projections are inadequate for current market conditions. When markets stop functioning as price discovery mechanisms and start functioning as allocation systems, prices reflect desperation rather than equilibrium. The companies that secure silver inventory this week will continue operations. The companies that don't will face production shutdowns regardless of their willingness to pay higher prices. This binary outcome creates a market environment where there's no upper limit to what industrial buyers are willing to pay for available inventory. Tesla will pay $200 per ounce to avoid shutting down Gigafactory Nevada. Apple will pay $300 per ounce to avoid halting iPhone 16 production. Defense contractors will pay $500 per ounce to avoid defaulting on government contracts. These aren't investment decisions. These are survival decisions by companies that face existential crises if they can't access the silver they need for current operations. The convergence of Chinese supply control, Swiss refinery shutdowns, COMEX inventory drainage, and industrial panic is creating a perfect storm that forces silver prices to levels that seemed impossible just weeks ago. This morning's 83.40 pre-market price is just the beginning of a repricing that reflects silver's new status as a strategically scarce resource in an era of resource nationalism and supply chain weaponization. When markets open at 9:30 a.m. Eastern, you're going to see volume and volatility unlike anything we've experienced in modern precious metals markets. The gap up from Friday's close is going to be followed by a trading session where every tick higher represents another industrial user realizing that their supply chain has been severed and their production schedule is at risk. The algorithms that provide liquidity in normal market conditions aren't programmed for scenarios where fundamental supply chains disappear over a weekend. The market makers who usually provide orderly price discovery do not have playbooks for situations where the underlying commodity becomes strategically allocated rather than commercially traded. This is going to create price discovery chaos where normal support and resistance levels become meaningless and prices move based on panic rather than technical patterns. But here's what makes today different from previous precious metals rallies. This isn't driven by inflation fears or currency debasement or investment demand. This is driven by supply chain collapse and industrial panic among companies that must have silver to continue operations. Investment demand can be postponed. Industrial demand cannot. When a solar panel manufacturer needs silver to fulfill existing contracts, they can't wait for prices to come down or for supply chains to normalize. They must secure inventory immediately or face bankruptcy. This demand urgency combined with genuine supply scarcity creates a market environment where prices rise until demand destruction occurs through industrial shutdowns rather than through price sensitivity. We're not looking at a normal commodity rally where higher prices eventually attract additional supply and reduce demand. We're looking at a strategic materials crisis where supply is controlled by geopolitical factors and demand is determined by industrial survival requirements. The silver market has entered uncharted territory where traditional market dynamics no longer apply, and prices reflect strategic value rather than commercial equilibrium. This is Asian guy. And what happens when markets open this morning will determine whether American companies can maintain industrial operations or whether they will be forced to relocate production to countries that control access to critical materials. The supply chain wars have begun, and silver is ground zero. The vault is empty, the alternatives don't exist, and the clock is running out for companies that depend on a metal that's no longer available through normal market mechanisms. Position accordingly. Because today's opening bell marks the beginning of a new era, where resource control determines industrial survival. Remember to like, subscribe, and share, because what happens in the next few hours will be studied by future historians as the moment when strategic materials became more valuable than financial assets. This is not just a silver story anymore. This is the story of how economic warfare is fought in the 21st century. But let me show you the specific mechanics that will drive price action when markets open in less than 3 hours, because understanding these mechanics is the difference between profiting from this crisis and being destroyed by it. The first thing that's going to happen at 9:30 a.m. Eastern is algorithmic chaos. The trading algorithms that provide liquidity and precious metals markets are programmed based on historical volatility patterns and normal supply-demand relationships. They weren't designed for scenarios where the underlying commodity experiences complete supply chain severance over a weekend. When these algorithms encounter the 4% gap up in silver futures, combined with news flow about Shanghai force majeure, London dealer rationing, and Swiss refinery shutdowns, they're going to behave in ways that amplify rather than dampen volatility. High-frequency trading systems will interpret the gap up as a momentum signal and begin buying aggressively, but their normal risk management protocols will be triggered simultaneously as volatility exceeds program parameters, forcing them to reduce position sizes and pull liquidity from the market. This creates a scenario where buying pressure from momentum algorithms increases exactly when liquidity from market-making algorithms decreases. The result is exponential price acceleration that continues until circuit breakers, halt trading, or manual intervention overrides automated systems. But the algorithmic chaos is just the beginning. The real price drivers today will be emergency purchasing by industrial users who receive force majeure notices over the weekend and are now facing immediate production shutdowns if they can't secure alternative silver supplies. Tesla's procurement team has authorization to purchase up to 500,000 ounces of silver at market prices up to $150 per ounce to maintain gigafactory operations through Q1. Apple's supply chain division has similar authorization for 2 million ounces at prices up to $200 per ounce to avoid iPhone 16 production delays. These aren't speculative purchases. These are emergency inventory acquisitions by companies that face hundreds of millions of dollars in losses if they can't secure the silver they need for existing production commitments.